I want to take a second before I share my message with you, that there are always so many people to thank. Of course, our wonderful, wonderful guest presenters who have come and shared their hearts with us. But I also want to thank Marley Billings and Jen Goostrey. Where are you back here? Yay. They are just such a support. Anything I ask, they do. And if any of you have gone through the Right Heart class, they are the ones that put that together. And I just am so appreciative. And they're running around taking care of things. I also want to offer a special thanks to Dick Kinmont, who is here videotaping this conference today. And and there's someone else in this room that made it possible. I really felt like it should be taped, and I didn't have the budget, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And last Thursday, or Friday, I can't remember, I woke up, I said, Heavenly Father, if this needs to be taped, I need help. I don't know what to do. And at 7 a.m., I had a phone call from somebody who said, Marlene, is there something you need for the conference? And I told her, and she made the arrangements. So, wow. And I'm also honored to have Dick Kinmont's wife, Joyce, with us, who, if you're in the homeschooling community, she is a pioneer. She is like the pioneer of the homeschooling movement in Utah, and just so honored to meet you. And thank you for being here. And a big shout out. On the way in here, I said to, who was I with? I don't know. I said, well, if everything fails, we'll just go look at the garden and everyone will feel good for being here. But my one big worry was the microphone. And Jordan came, and his mother tells me he's in the middle of studying for a very, very important exam, and he's taken his time to make sure that you can all hear what's going on. So I thought, what can we do for Jordan? And what more powerful thing can we do than to have a room full of women praying for him to pass his exam for taking the day off to come and do this. So Jordan, you've got some prayers coming, okay. And I have 7 of my 8 daughters here today. They're mingled around, and they said, Mom, don't make a big deal. But they're here. It's like, where's Waldo? They're blonde. And I'm really excited that they are here and all their help. My daughter, Sarah, your beautiful little notebooks that you have to take notes in, and the website and the program was my daughter, Sarah's work. And I told her the one problem is no one's going to want to write in it because it's so pretty. And my mother is here. She's almost 96 years old. And so happy Mother's Day, Mama. Glad that she's here. Yay. And most important, my thanks to my husband. That you all, if you're doing things with Libraries of Hope, you don't know the thousands, literally thousands of hours he's done behind the scenes to do the technical work to bring this to pass. Because if it wasn't for him, this would just be an idea stuck in my head. That he's formatted and done everything. And I left him 3 weeks ago to come out here, and on my way out I said, could you order some pens for the conference? And there were a couple of choices, and maybe some of you saw this text that he said, well, I went with the squiggle one that was a little more expensive because it infused more joy. And every time I've been using the pens all week, they do infuse joy. So, yay. So thank you, all of you. And especially for all of you for being here and for the energy that you are bringing. And I have felt very much a message to talk about. And part of this will be familiar if you've listened to things that I've said. But, well, you'll see. Because I see something extraordinary on the horizon. And I believe that mothers are the key players in something that's going to happen. There are things lining up that I can see. And I want to share that with you, but in order for you to catch the vision, I need to do a little layering of some impressions. So I'd like to start with a story, of course, right? A story by Hans Christian Andersen called The Snow Queen. Long, long ago, there lived a hobgoblin, a demon really, who one day made a mirror that had a particular power. Everything that was good or beautiful that was reflected in it was made to look small and ugly, while everything that was bad and ugly was magnified, and every little fault could be plainly seen. The scholars in his demon school carried the mirror all over the world until there wasn't a land or a people who had not been looked at in this distorted mirror. They thought it would look even funnier if they could carry it high into the heavens to look at the angels in it. But the higher they rose, the slipperier it became until it slipped from their hands and crashed to the earth, shattering into millions of pieces. Now the mirror caused even more unhappiness, for if a speck no larger than a grain of sand lodged in a person's eye, it had the power of the whole mirror, and they viewed everything the wrong way. They could neither see rightly nor justly. And even worse, if a tiny shard entered the heart grew as cold as ice. The pieces soon covered the whole earth. The demon laughed so hard at the mischief he had caused that he nearly split his sides. Now in a large town lived two poor little children who loved each other dearly. Kai and Gerda often played under the red rose bush that grew near their homes. One day, just as the clock struck 12, Kai said, "Oh, something has struck my heart, and it feels like there's something in my eye." When Gerda asked what was wrong and started to cry, Kai mockingly told her to stop crying because she looked ugly when she was crying. And besides, there was nothing wrong with him. "Look at the worm on that rose, and why is that rose crooked? And what an ugly little box it is." And he kicked it as he walked by and ran off to play with the boys. By and by, he began to make fun of the townspeople, and the people laughed and thought he was very clever. He now thought the picture books and the stories that his grandmother told him were very stupid. One day, as he was playing on his sleigh, a large white sleigh carrying a white figure wrapped in white fur circled the field. Kai was intrigued, grabbed hold of the back of the sleigh, and off they flew. Faster and faster they went. He tried to let go, but he couldn't. He was afraid, and he tried to pray, but all he could remember were his multiplication tables. At long last, the sleigh stopped and the driver stood up. She was tall and beautiful. She was a snow queen. She opened her warm fur coat for Kai to snuggle in. "Are you still cold?" she asked as she kissed his forehead. Although his heart was almost a lump of ice, he somehow no longer felt cold or afraid. He thought the face of the Snow Queen was the most beautiful he had ever seen. He could imagine nothing more perfect. He proudly told her he could do arithmetic as far as fractions in his head, and that he knew the number of square miles, the number of inhabitants in the country. And the Snow Queen smiled. Off they flew again, over woods and lakes, over sea and land, and Kai felt perfectly safe. Meanwhile, little Gerda didn't believe what the townspeople said, that Kai must have drowned in the river. She set off to search for him, and after a hard and difficult journey, arrived at the magnificent ice palace of the Snow Queen. There were hundreds of empty, vast, and cold rooms in the palace, all made of drifted snow. The largest hall stretched for several miles. In the midst of this empty, endless hall of snow was a frozen lake, and there, in the center of it, stood the Snow Queen. She called the lake the mirror of reason and said it was the best and indeed the only one in the world. When Gerda finally found Kai, he was quite blue with cold, almost black, but he didn't feel it, for the Snow Queen had kissed away his icy shiverings. There he was, dragging sharp, flat pieces of ice to and fro, trying to get them to fit together in different ways. It was the icy game of reason he was playing, and in his eyes, the figures he created were very remarkable and of the highest importance. Yet, try though he may, he could not create the one figure he desperately wanted to make. He was trying to form the word eternity, for the Snow Queen had told him, "When you find out this, you shall be your own master, and I will give you the whole world and a new pair of skates." Gerda ran to Kai and threw her arms around his neck. "Kai, dear little Kai, I found you at last." But he sat quite still, stiff and cold. Then Gerda wept hot tears that penetrated his heart and began to melt the lump of ice until Kai also burst into tears, washing away the speck that had lodged in his eye. "Gerda, where have you been, and where am I?" As he looked all around him, he exclaimed, "How cold it is, and how large and empty it all looks." The two danced, crying tears of joy until they fell to the ground, wrapped in each other's arms. And as they lie there, their figure formed at last the word eternity, and Kai was forever free from the Snow Queen's power. The two made their way back to the red rose bush, where they both sat, grown up, yet children at heart. And it was summer, warm, beautiful summer. Now I'm going to come back and visit the Snow Queen in a minute, but I want to now layer in another impression of contrast. I was flying home from a conference several weeks ago, and I had a window seat. And I was looking down at the ground below, and I was noticing how small all the cities looked down there. And for whatever reason, I tried to imagine the Tower of Babel down there. I think it's because we know the Tower of Babel was a very large building. And I pictured the people that built it looking at this tower from their point of view. And I could picture them standing there and looking up and going, wow, look what we have built by the workmanship of our own hands. It's magnificent. And we can see from here, it must reach all the way up into heaven. We can just climb our way up and go up to heaven and bring on another flood. We've got it covered this time. If the waters come, we'll just walk up and we'll save ourselves. And then I tried to imagine that same tower from God's perspective. I was just a couple of miles up in the air, but from where I was, that tower was very, very tiny, a little speck. And then my mind shifted, and I replaced that tower with another tower, Trump's tower. And I only say that because we all know he's a very rich man. And I pictured all of his wealth, and I put all of his wealth in gold bricks and piled it up around his tower. And from where I was, it was a tiny little dot. And then maybe you've seen an image of this. I tried to picture how big our world is. I was maybe taking in 50 or 100 square miles. I tried to think, how big is the country? How big is 25,000 miles around? That's huge. Our Earth is huge. And the little Trump Tower just got smaller. And then, if you've seen it, the Earth, as big as it seems, when it is next to the sun, the Earth becomes the dot. And then when you put the solar system into the Milky Way, the solar system becomes the dot. And if you put the Milky Way against the universe, the Milky Way becomes the dot. And that little Trump Tower is nothing, absolutely nothing. And then I noticed, and here came the impression of the contrast. Everywhere, as far as my eyes could see, was light. Light as far as I could see. And I thought about the scripture that was shared, that the light of Christ fills the immensity of space. We have different words for that light. We call it the Spirit of the Lord. We call it truth. We call it living waters, and we're told that anybody that partakes of these living waters shall never thirst again. Well, the effect of this light upon us, the fruit of this Spirit, is that we feel joy and peace and love and understanding. These are the gifts of the Spirit. This is the pearl of great price, that the merchant would sell all that he had to own this. This is the joy of the ancient king, that when he heard of it, he said he would give up all that he owned and even his own kingdom to possess it. This is the fruit on a tree in a vision. This is El Dorado, a golden kingdom that the natives had a legendary hero that came and told him of a golden kingdom and promised he would return. It's the Holy Grail. This is the eternity that little Kai was searching for and that the icy game of reason could not give him. In Earth's economy, the richest person is the one that has the most money. But in heaven's economy, the richest person is the one with the greatest capacity for this light or this joy. So the question is, how do we increase that capacity for this valuable gift that is out there for us? Well, when I think of secret combinations, I think of sinister persons in a dark room combining forces to overthrow the world and to work great works of destruction and darkness. And I thought, if there's a secret combination, there must be a sacred combination for light, right? And I've come to believe that there is a sacred combination. And it's so simple you may completely disregard it. But I hope that I will be able to build my case for this sacred combination. And this is what it is: heart and mind. Or another way of putting it is, the greater the heart desires that which is good and beautiful and true, and combines with a willingness to comply with true principles, that light increases. Take away one of the parts of the combination, and the light is blocked. We are a very mind-based, academic-focused culture, aren't we? You know that you are dealing with the mind because you can test and measure it. How far away is the sun? What's the inhabitant of New York? How many inhabitants in New York? What's the definition of this word? We associate reason with the mind and science with the mind, which is all about discovering the laws, principles, and rules by which the universe operates. The mind is always looking for proof and evidence. Science and the mind are good. But Aristotle understood over 2,000 years ago, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. The heart, on the other hand, is completely immeasurable. How deep is joy? How wide is love? In fact, the deeper something travels into your heart, as Angela taught us, the harder it is to express what it is that we're feeling. Like the poet said, the deeps of the soul, like the deeps of the ocean, are silent. The heart is the place of dreams and visions and desires. And the tools for stirring feelings and awakening desires are the arts: story, music, imagery, and poetry. In fact, you even find the word art in the word heart. These are the tools by which we can warm and open hearts. There's a law in nature that says that something that is not used will atrophy from disuse. I was reading a book about Charles Darwin. In his later life, he wrote, "If I had to live my life again, I would have made it a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once a week, for perhaps the parts of my brain now atrophied would thus have been kept alive through use. The loss of these tastes is a loss of happiness. Formerly, I was led to the firm conviction of God and of the immortality of the soul." He recalled writing in his journal when he was a young man that he had been filled with this sense of wonder and awe when he stood in this vast Brazilian forest. He wrote in his journal, "It is not possible to give an adequate idea of the higher feelings of wonder, admiration, and devotion which fill and elevate the mind." He continued, "I well remember my conviction that there is more in man than the mere breath of the body. But now the grandest scene would not cause any such conviction and feelings to rise in my mind. Disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate, but was at last complete. The rate was so slow that I felt no distress." On the other hand, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And I would add, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God in the trees and in the flowers and in the stars. They shall see God in history. They shall see God in inspired works of art and music, and they shall see God in their own lives." God cannot be reasoned. He is felt, and the hard heart cannot feel him. By neglecting the heart and focusing on the mind and academics in childhood, we are hardening the hearts of our children, and we're blocking the light. I've come to believe that there's an order to this combination. The heart develops before the brain within the womb, and emotions develop before the intellect outside of the womb. In fact, neuroscientists who have looked at the brain say that the first intellectual shift doesn't happen till about age 8. What that means is nature has reserved childhood for making impressions on the hearts of your children when the hearts are open and uncluttered. So if you take advantage of that time and immerse children in story, in music, in poetry, in imagery, you can plant desires in their hearts for that which is good and beautiful that will be with them their entire lives. The heart and mind pattern also tell you that any time that you're going to attempt to teach academics or a principle or a doctrine, you always start by warming the heart before you attempt to teach that. Of what worth is it to teach the mechanics of reading or the decoding of words to a child if that child has no desire to read? But if you tend to their love of stories first, then their desire, they will find a way to read. It's just the natural order of things. Now, because we are a very mind-based evidence, we want the evidence culture, you may be asking, so where's the evidence of this pattern? And let me just share a couple of places that I see it. But as you're aware of it, you will probably find this all over the place, because I do. Both the Old and the New Testaments are front-end loaded with story. Most of the stories we know are in the book of Genesis or in the 4 Gospels. And then come the doctrines, commandments, principles. And at the back end of the books are books like Isaiah and Revelation that require a lot of preparatory learning, but even with that the true meaning can only be revealed spirit to spirit. John the Baptist, what was his role except to warm and open the desires of the people's hearts so that they would be ready to learn the law of the gospel as taught by Jesus, who was preparing them to receive the Holy Ghost, who would teach them all things that they must do. And you even find the pattern in nature. You can plant a seed in the ground and shine light on it all day long, but until the soil warms up, that life force is going to remain dormant. I even found the pattern in history. Ancient Greece was known for its desire for beauty. Ancient Rome for their laws and justice. And then came Jesus, who taught of a spiritual kingdom. Heart, and then mind, and then spirit. As simple as this combination of heart and mind appears, the world has had a really hard time holding on to the balance. Yet history shows that every time mind and heart combine, every time art and science combine, every time faith and reason combine, there's this burst of light upon the world. And we even call these times golden ages. So let me just take you on a brief tour through history, very brief. And let's go back to 5th century BC to the golden age of Greece. This was a time where you had the heart and mind together. You had Socrates out teaching people to think. And then you had Pericles, a wise ruler who gave the people wise rules to live by. But he also was a lover of the arts, and he would commission great buildings to be built, like the Acropolis and the Parthenon, that were built to the highest standards of math and engineering, but are also crafted by the artisans who loved that which was beautiful. You had great dramatists like Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes that were writing great plays to keep the people's hearts warm. It was an era that is still influencing us 2,500 years later. But then after a series of wars, the people could sense that their golden age was slipping. And they did what we tend to do. They started to reason together and say, what can we do to get back to our golden age? And they said, aha, I know what we'll do. We'll create great academies, and we'll teach our young men how to think and how to reason and how to persuade others. We'll use these academies to produce great leaders, and these leaders will lead us back to our golden age. Well, not only did these academies fail to produce one single leader of note, the Greeks slipped into slavery, never to rise again. So now you fast forward several hundred years past the time of Christ, and now things have swung the other way, and you have a people who are ruled by their emotions. The great power players of the day are the storytellers and the bards who know that they can sway the people to think anything they want them to with their stories and their songs. And the people are driven by their fears based on superstitions and false traditions. We call it the Dark Ages. It was half the combination, and the light was blocked. Well, fast forward a few hundred more years to the 14th century, and now we have the Greek intellectual writings coming into Italy and into Europe, and suddenly for this moment, we have mind and heart combining. And we call it a rebirth. That's what Renaissance meant. It was a rebirth. And look at the giants that were produced in the 1400s and the 1500s. We had Shakespeare, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus, Martin Luther. We had the great explorers, Christopher Columbus, and all the others out exploring at this great time of light. And then man said, wow, man is magnificent, isn't he? Look what we have done by the workmanship of our own hands. And we entered an age of reason, leaving behind the heart and our faith. Well, it was in the 18th century, at this age of reason, that a very tender-hearted, kind man named Pestalozzi, Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, arrived on the scene. And he looked around and he said to himself, for all this vast learning going on, it's not making the people any happier. They're miserable, and especially the children were miserable. The adults were so anxious for them to be able to read these Greek writings that almost from the time they could speak, they were teaching them Greek. And Pestalozzi knew there was something really wrong with that. He wrote, I wish to wrest education from cheap, artificial teaching tricks and entrust it to the eternal process of nature herself, to the light which God has kindled and kept alive in the hearts of fathers and mothers. Love is the sole and everlasting foundation in which to work. And he continued, the primary law is this: the first instruction of the child should never be the business of the head or of the reason. It should always be the business of the heart. It is for a long time the business of the heart before it is the business of reason. He was given a group of orphans to care for, and he started to put into practice his heart education, and he started to utilize story, rhyme, pictures, and song with these children. He didn't have a lot to work with. And even back then, they had school administrators, and the school administrator came into his classroom and said, Mr. Pestalozzi, where are your test scores? And he said, look around. The children, they're happy, they're engaged in learning, they're teaching each other. And he was given that stern look of disapproval because we just want the test scores. Well, it's an uphill battle to go against the Snow Queen. Well, one of Pestalozzi's followers was a man named Friedrich Froebel, who also understood. And the thing that he picked up from Pestalozzi is Pestalozzi came to believe that the most effective teacher of the heart of a child is the mother. In fact, Pestalozzi wrote, the eternal laws of nature lead me back to your hand, mother. Well, Froebel understood this too, but there was a problem. The poor mothers were so overworked and exhausted, just trying to keep their families alive, that he knew that there was no way that he could get them to do one more thing. But he noticed that it was usually the oldest daughter in the family that had charge of the siblings. So the idea came, what if we could bring these older girls in with their younger siblings, and we could train the girls while they're young, so that when they grow up to be mothers, they'll know what to do. And so they started the first kindergarten, child garden, a place to grow children. The purpose of the first kindergarten was to train mothers. And he thought it might take 3 generations for it to happen, but they began. Well, then something wonderful started to happen, because these writings of Pestalozzi and the educating of the heart started to catch on. And they started to influence a lot of people, such as Charlotte Mason, who wrote, "We allow no separation to grow up between the intellectual and spiritual life of children, but teach them that the divine spirit has constant access to their spirits and is their continual helper in all the interests, duties, and joys of life." She taught true education is between a child's soul and God. Maria Montessori was also influenced, and her work was with some of the poorest children in Rome. And on the opening day of her school, she read from the words of Isaiah, "Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee." And at the conclusion of her speech, she added, "Perhaps it may be that this children's home may become a new Jerusalem, which, as it is multiplied, will bring light into education." She was criticized for what she said and was asked what she meant, and she said that she scarcely knew. Well, he also influenced Rudolf Steiner, who started the Waldorf method. And then something wonderful happened. There was this whole group of great intellectual giants, scholars in history, in literature, in art, in music, in nature. And as they came to understand the importance of educating hearts of children, they took their great knowledge and they wrapped it into a story. And the wonderful thing about these stories is at the beginning of so many of their books, you would see little notes like, "Dear boys and girls, I love you. I want you to be happy." And so they would load the stories with principles for happy living and full of faith in God and a desire for that which is good and true and beautiful. It was the combination of heart and mind, art and science, faith and reason. And guess what this age of children's literature is called between 1880 and 1920? It's the golden age of children's literature. Well, something more wonderful happened after that. In the early 1900s, there was a revival in the art of storytelling. And mothers started doing what mothers do. They started to organize, and they started to form study groups to relearn this art of storytelling. And then I just found this out. In 1910, the Delphian Society was formed. And the purpose of the Delphian Society, they understood that it was difficult for mothers and women to go off to college, so they brought college to them. And they created the Delphian Reading Course, in which it was the equivalent of a bachelor's in classic studies in history, literature, art, music, and nature. And the mothers got together once a month and had conversations about what they were learning. Do you think it's a coincidence that the generation that followed is called the greatest generation? Well, then came the 20s and the 30s, and the Snow Queen swooped into the scene with all of her warm furs, and she was beautiful and irresistible. And a man named John Dewey was mesmerized by her, and he was to change the course of education for the next 100 years. He signed his name to a document in 1933, the Humanist Manifesto, in which it stated, "Reason and intelligence are the most effective instruments that humankind possesses. There is no substitute. And by the way, there is no God." And here we are, back into another age of reason. A time of facts and information, scientific proof and evidence, test and measure everything. And something has happened in our world that Hans Christian Andersen said would happen in a world where the Snow Queen reigns. The world turns upside down. where that which was good is now seen as bad, and that which was bad is now seen as good, and every fault is magnified, and every good is mocked. I hope you can begin to see why this call for more math and science, for more rigorous academics, for academics in younger and younger ages, is actually fueling the problem. Have you looked up the word academic in the dictionary? I did. This is what I found in the online Merriam-Webster dictionary. Having no practical importance. Not involving or relating to anything real or practical, having no practical or useful significance. And we don't want just academics, we want rigorous academics. Well, rigorous and rigor mortis have the same root word, rigor, which means stiffness and rigidness, and even voluntary submission to pain. We're trying the failed solution of the Greeks. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. Here is the extraordinary event that I see just over the horizon. What if we could hold on to this height of intellect? We're told that knowledge is doubling every 72 hours. What if we could hold on to this height of intellect and do a proportionate depth of heart? Wouldn't you expect to see a burst of light upon the world and the entrance into another golden age like the world has never seen before? Isn't that what prophets, poets, and sages have seen throughout the ages? Well, this is what I get excited about, because look at what technology has gifted us in just the last 10 to 15 years that can make this happen. First, let's look at great literature. Think about this. In the 10th century, a princess gave 200 sheep, a load of wheat, a load of rye, a load of millet, and several costly furs for one copy of a German monk's writing. While one of the Gospels written on parchment was so costly that only the fortune of a prince could purchase one book. In 1999, Internet Archive was formed with the intention of digitizing every book that has ever been written and posting it online for everyone to read it for free. They have so far digitized over 11 million books, and they are doing it at the rate of 1,000 books a day. Part of that great harvest of books is this golden age of literature, of children's literature that I told you about, and also the writings of these heart educators that have been buried by the Snow Queen for the last 100 years. And along the way, technology gifted us with a tablet, so we have a portable and a convenient way to read all these books, right? Look what technology has given us to access great art. In the 15th century, when the great Florentine artist Cimabue, our art experts over here, completed his Madonna, the shops were closed, workmen dropped their tools, farmers left their tasks, the soldiers were released from the camp, all the people assembled in the streets. The artist was borne on the shoulders of the multitude. The picture was lifted up and carried at the head of a procession that marched with music and banners and tumultuous shouts toward the church, where the canvas was hung that all people might feast their eyes upon its loveliness. One painting. Today, I can do a Google search and access hundreds of thousands of masterpieces of art that have been hidden away in palaces and private estates and museums all over the world. Why does it matter? Over 100 years ago, John Van Dyke wrote, "It will take years before you can come to a full appreciation of art, but when at last you have it, you will be possessed of one of the purest, loftiest, and most ennobling pleasures that the civilized world can offer you." And look what technology has given us for masterpieces of music. YouTube has only been around since 2005. But with YouTube, I can access just about any masterpiece of music and watch it played by the finest musicians all over the world. I have front row seats to the Bolshoi Ballet. I have front row seats to the Metropolitan Opera. In fact, when I get ready to do my dishes, I can invite Leonard Bernstein into the kitchen and ask him to bring his entire symphony orchestra and hand him my playlist and ask him to play and have surround sound to experience it for free. Brigham Young taught, "Sweet, harmonious sounds give exquisite joy to human beings capable of appreciating music." The master musicians made it possible for us to feel emotions that we had never felt before, even seeking to reveal the very glory of God to our hearts. Their music travels to a place in our hearts that words cannot reach. The kings and queens of yesterday, with all their wealth, could not have had the kind of heart education now delivered to the humblest home for free. This is an education fit for a royal generation. And it wasn't planned, but as the conference was put together and the design came, purple became the dominant color. And as I was reading this, I realized purple is the color of royalty. This is a royal education. My work of the last 10 years has been to search for and collect and gather these resources and make them convenient for families to be able to use. And that's what you find at Libraries of Hope. But there's just one missing piece for us to be able to make this combination of heart and mind. And to describe that missing piece, I need to go back to ancient Greece, because scholars attribute the opening of that age to a poet named Pindar, who awakened a desire in the Greek hearts of the Greeks for that which was beautiful through his poetry. And I thought to myself, but who planted the desire in Pindar's heart? And I found the answer in an old children's book. When Pindar was a young man, he had two teachers, two women named Clertis and Myrna, two renowned singers who sang songs into his heart. What we need is a generation of mothers to sing songs in the hearts of their children, to awaken a desire in them to begin to partake of this harvest of heart resources that has been gifted to them from the ages. I believe that you have been chosen and prepared for this very day. So how are you going to do it? I believe the pattern is given by Jesus Christ as he called for bread and wine to be brought to his 12 chosen disciples. And he told them to eat, and when they were filled, to feed the multitude. I believe that is the pattern for you, that you have been prepared for this. And as you begin to eat, that it will be out of the treasures of your own heart that you will begin to fill the hearts of your children. As David O. McKay once said, only the warm heart can kindle warmth in another. Our hearts have been so depleted it may take 3 generations for this to happen, but we can begin. I believe the heavens are watching and angels are standing by to assist you. As Helen Hunt Jackson exclaimed over 100 years ago, "Oh, if the world could only stop long enough for one generation of mothers to be all right, what a millennium could be begun in just 30 years." I see mothers picking up where they left off 100 years ago. We needed the reign of the Snow Queen to give us the technology to make all of this possible, for the work to continue. And the time is ripe for the ushering in of the next age. And now mothers are doing what mothers do. They're organizing. I am seeing mothers begin to form study groups. I've created a mother's university at welleducatedheart.com where I've compiled the writings of these heart educators of 100 years ago for you to study. And mothers are doing that. They're getting together and they're going to cultural events, to symphonies and ballets. There's wonderful resources at Libraries of Hope with art appreciation and music appreciation courses that are aimed at the heart rather than the intellect that can be used. Mothers are starting to relearn the art of storytelling in their home. They're starting to use fine literature in their book clubs. And even that Delphian course that I mentioned earlier is online for free for you to use. If you feel like you never had your college education, it's free and you can draw from it. All of this can be adapted to your own capacity and circumstances. But look what else technology has gifted you. When my mother was a little girl on a farm, potato farm in Idaho Falls, her mother not only had 8 little mouths to feed, she had to feed the farm hands. She couldn't run down to the store and pick up the groceries. She had to go down to the creek and fish the suckers out and cook them up. And then she had to chop the wood and start a fire and go back to the creek and haul water and heat the water up so that she could wash the dishes and then do it all over again. You can put your dishes in a dishwasher and push a button and walk away. You can put dinner in a microwave, push a button, 5 minutes, you've got dinner on the table. You put your dirty clothes in a washing machine, push a button, walk away. What generation of mothers has ever been gifted the time that this generation of mothers has been given? And one more gift of technology that the mothers of 100 years ago didn't have, the ability to network. How long would it take for a message of educating heart to reach out? If you tell your friends and they tell their friends and they begin to gather and to study these things of the heart. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I'm hoping that this conference today can be used for that you can draw your friends together and hold a simple joy conference in your own home, in your own area, and start to awaken a desire in your friends and your family of this message of we've got to reach the hearts of our children, because they are hardening. Did you see that report a couple of days ago, KUTV News, where they said that the retention, I think, of the millennials, 27% go to church. And even in the LDS community, which previously had a 90% retention rate, meaning their kids grew up in a house of faith and would stay active, in the 70s or 80s, 90% remained active. That number is now 60% and dropping fast. I would say it's the Snow Queen. I would say that we're hardening their hearts and that this is the way that we can start to get them back. I just want to add, this isn't just for young mothers. That if you have these groups, that I hope that you will include women whose children are grown. The influence of a grandmother is priceless, isn't it? And that this isn't just for homeschoolers, this is for anybody. And for anybody that doesn't have children. Remember, most of the great heart educators that I mentioned had no children of their own, but their influence on the lives of children was immeasurable. I see a network of mothers quietly weaving a net of safety and refuge, unknown to the world at large. As I keep saying, we are living in the day of the harvest, and the harvests of fall are always followed by winter. Farmers understand the necessity of winter. Many plants have to have the cold before they bloom. Winter is a time when growth is temporarily halted while energy is held in reserve, building up for new growth. It's a time for growing stronger root systems. Without a sufficient chilling time, a fruit tree will generate fewer and weaker buds, and some seeds will just rot. The cold also destroys harmful bacteria and pests. Winter has been prophesied, and it's necessary. But I find hope in the fact that it says that even in the midst of this winter is seen a people making their way, singing songs of joy. They carry their kingdom of light within them. I don't worry about numbers. I know what a little leaven can do. I know what a little salt can do, and even a single candle in a dark room. Remember, there was just one Pindar, wasn't there? In the final scene of Camelot, King Arthur reminds us what we all are, less than a drop in the great blue motion of the sunlit sea. But it seems that some of the drops sparkle. Some of them do sparkle. As you use the arts to stir feelings and awaken a desire for the good, the beautiful, and the true in the hearts of your children, and teach them the joy of complying and obeying true principles, their kingdom of light within will grow. They will sparkle, and out of the treasures of their heart, They will begin to build a new kingdom upon the earth. I'd like to just close with another Hans Christian Andersen story. This one is as told by Kate Douglas Wiggin, who you may recognize wrote Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. But she was also instrumental in bringing the kindergarten program to America. And it's appropriately in the book of her life, appropriate for this setting. It's called My Garden of Memory. And it's in the final chapter called The Song Is Never Ended. In childhood, whenever I read Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, which was all too seldom, for we had but one copy of the book, I always turned first to the story of the flax. If you don't know what a flax is, it's the little blue flower on the back of your little notebook that you have. And as my sister and I grew older and were incessantly telling or reading stories to children, it exerted a great fascination, indeed a great influence over me. It seemed a little piece of religion and in some way a philosophy of life. Do you remember how the flax said to itself one fine summer morning, "I am strong and tall. I am in full bloom, and every day something delightful happens to me. Oh, this is a beautiful world." A hedge stake nearby, you know, overheard the flax and grumbled, "It takes those who have knots in their stems to know the world." And he creaked out a mournful song, "Snip, snap, snurra, basalura. The song is ended." "Oh no," cried the flax. "The song is not ended. It has hardly begun. Every day the sunshine gladdens or the rain refreshes me. I know that I am growing. I know that I am in full blossom. I am the happiest of all creatures." I used to feel even then that the hedge stake was wrong in his philosophy of existence. But very soon in the story, the flax, now full grown, was pulled up by the roots, laid in water till it was almost drowned, and set by the fire until it was almost roasted. "One must not complain," said the flax. "If I've suffered something, I'm being made into something." And when it was put upon the wheel and spun into thread, and the thread wove it into a web, still it sang its song of content, as the wheel whirred and the shuttle shot to and fro. I think two little girls sitting by an open fire learned something, with a few tears falling on the page of the beloved book, learned something just then, not through the head, but the heart. Then the flax was spread upon the grass as a long piece of white linen, the finest in the parish. And there were many changes after that, snipping and cutting and making into garments. And the flax said, "See how little the hedge stake knew when he told me the song was ended? Look what I've become. This was my destiny. Now I shall be of some use in the world. I am the happiest of all creatures." At last the garments were worn quite to rags, and then they were cut into smaller bits and softened and boiled till they became white paper. "What a glorious surprise!" cried the flax. "Now perhaps a poet may come and write his thoughts upon me. See how I am led on from glory to glory, I who was only a little blue flower growing in the fields. Ah, the poor hedge stake, how little he knew about life." And truly, a poet did come and write beautiful thoughts on the shining white leaves, and they were sent to the printers and made into books. "This is the best of all," said the flax. "Now I shall sit at home like an honored grandfather, and my books will travel all over the lands. How happy I am! Each time I think the song is ended, it begins again in a more beautiful way." But now the paper was thrust into a barrel and sold to a grocer for wrapping his butter and sugar. "I had not thought of this," said the flax. Though the two little girls had, and 100 readings could not prevent momentary tears. But after all, it is better, for I have been so hurried from one stage of my life to another that I've never had time to think. After work, it is well to rest. Now I can reflect on my real condition. But it did not happen as the flax had thought, for the grocer's children were fond of burning paper on the hearth. They liked the flash of the flames up the chimney, the gray ashes below, and the red sparks careering here and there, and they often danced and sang when the fire was flashing its brightest. So they pulled all the paper from the barrel one day and set it afire. Whoosh went the blaze up the chimney, It soared higher than the flax had ever lifted its blue flowers, and glistened as the white linen had never glistened. "Now I'm mounting straight up to the sun," cried a voice far above the chimney, and more delicate than the flames, invisible to human eyes, a myriad tiny beings floated in the air above, many, many more than there had been blossoms on the flax. Down below, the children sang the rhyme of the hedge stake over the dead ashes. Snip, snap, snurra, basalura. The song is ended. But the little invisible beings in the air above them sang together as clearly as if there had been 1,000 voices in unison. The song is never ended. The most beautiful is yet to come. We know it, and therefore we are the happiest of all. 2 Corinthians reminds us, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And I would add, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is peace, there is love. Where there is light, there is joy. It's that simple.